Thank you very much, Larry, and thanks very much to the group here who have taken their Monday evening to listen to the story. And that's the title of it, guys. I'll be honest with you. It's 43,000 stories. And the reason I'm using that is the title is there was about 43,000 participants, and depending on just what happened to you, what you were expecting, what your comfortability is, you will have had a different sort of experience from this World Jamboree. Um, just to give you a little bit of background, so my name is Dave Frederick. I've been with Scouts Canada for 30 years, and it was my honor and privilege to be the head of contingent for Canada for the past World Jamboree in South Korea. Canada is a little bit different. We have two national scouting organizations, or NSOs. We have Scouts Canada, and then we have l'Association des Scouts du Canada, which basically came out of the Catholic Quebec Scout Association. So they are our two NSOs in Canada. I had two deputies, one who was deputy head of contingent for Scouts Canada, and one who was deputy head of contingent or head of delegation for Les Scouts du Canada. And so we had a team of 15 CMT members, and our program started 3 years ago, is when we were first all brought in and hired for the World Jamboree. It has been an interesting experience over the last 3 years. Uh, this is me dressed up in a Korean king's outfit. They actually took us to on our first head of contingents meeting, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. So our first head of contingents meeting, that was in person. We actually got to explore a little bit, and we actually got to explore the site. It was an interesting experience. South Korea is a country that is a postcard every time you take a look around. It is absolutely a beautiful city. The people are amazing. And it's truly one of the gems of Asia. The infrastructure in South Korea for the cities of Seoul, Gwangju, Busan are absolutely second to none. Their subways are just brilliant, utilizing both their subway systems as well as their electronic systems as well too, for mapping out where you need to go and directions. You can find yourself any place in that city within 5 minutes. You know what your route is, and you can find out. So it was a bit of an interesting juxtaposition of a nation that is so technologically advanced, so keen on making sure that they save face, making sure that their infrastructure is second to none, with the experience that we actually had at the World Jamboree. I'll get more into the details of that. Here's all of us. This is my key members of the team. The gentleman on the right of me wearing the mask, he was Remy Lecharte. He's deputy delegation of Les Scouts du Canada. The gentleman directly to the left of me was our project manager. The young lady sitting next to there, Susie James, she was the deputy head of contingent of Scouts Canada. And the other gentleman behind Susie is David Franklin. And David Franklin was in charge of all the food houses. He was in charge of just our Canada food house, but later was sort of given the role of being in charge of all the food houses. And I think this is where I need to talk to you a little bit about how our structure was and why we came off as well as we did. So David Franklin was head of all of the food houses. We had another gentleman by the name of John Estrella, who was our national commissioner of international. John Estrella was in charge of all the programming. We had one of our board of directors in the camp chief's office. So he was directly attached to the camp chief. And we had some other key members of WASM who are Canadian as well too. So one of the things that we were able to do in 2.5 years is all of these people were feeding us information, letting us know what things were happening, what things weren't happening. And in the 2.5 years that we were sort of getting involved in the head of contingents, we started making I'd say friends, I would think, and reaching out to key head of contingent members. So we met up with the US head of contingent, Brad, and his team, which was Lou, Jeff, and I forget the other gentleman's name. It'll come to me. We got to become very good friends with that group. We met up with the UK head of contingent, headed by Liz Walker, Clive, Rob Murray, their team with the UK. The UK was the largest contingent with 4,500. The US was a fair size contingent. They weren't second largest. They had, about, I think, about 1,600, 1,700 going to the World Jamboree. We met up with, became good friends with Germany. Gernot was head of contingent for Germany. They had about 2,400, 2,500. The Australians, Lloyd Norton and Stephen Smart, who were their head of contingents. So we met up with, became pretty good friends with them. Chile, Esther Diaz. So there became a block of us of about 7 or 8 NSOs, National Scouting Organizations, who really were doing an awful lot of the talking, who were, for 2.5 years, we were sending emails back and forth, making sure that we understood what was happening, making sure we were planning for whatever sort of things that we were going to walk into. I say that with a sort of an importance because without that, that's where I think things started to fall apart, and we'll get into the timeline. Here is a map of the site, and I'll just point out some key things here. This, from this point here to the left to the right, is 7 kilometers. From this point here down by the visitor, this was the visitor center, to the point of the water here was 3 kilometers. So this whole site was 21 kilometers, 21 square kilometers. So if you were a unit and you were in this subcamp here, and your program activity was way over here, and you had to walk back, you'd be walking close to 10 to 14 kilometers just to get to your program for the day. All right. If you were over in this site here, and there wasn't anybody, because we're going to explain what happened to these 3 sites, but if you had been over in this site and this was your program area, again, you're walking almost 14 kilometers there and back to your site. If everybody came into here, which was the sort of the planned theater area. So everybody's walking about 3.5, 4 kilometers to the main area. This was the hub area. And so you'd be walking 8 kilometers just to get to the hub if you were lucky enough to be in some of these other areas. This section here that I'm outlining here, everybody can see my cursor? This area here, this was the IST camp. And so this is where all of the international service team members were camped. Canada was right in around here. Now, each one of these subcamps, and this was a subcamp, that's a subcamp, each one of these squares is a subcamp. Each one of these subcamps was provided with showers, and I'll point this one here, showers, toilets, washrooms, usually along the line up on the top. Then they would have a subcamp headquarters. The gray areas here and here were parking lots. This area in here and this area here was program. This was where the head of contingents were, as well as programming. This was more programming. And then this parking lot also managed all the buses offsite for any of the offsite activities as well too. This area here was the welcoming center, and we will talk about that. But there's some big problems with the design of this site. So we talked a little bit about how wide it is and how long it is. This is a bridge, this is a bridge, and this is a bridge. So there's only 3 bridges that are actually connecting all of this camp together. We'll talk a little bit more, but I wanted to point that out to you as we sort of discuss this. Now, this was the original design, and then this is what actually occurred. And so this is pretty close to what you saw there, except they moved some of the programming area in here. They swapped the theater, so the main exhibition area and the headquarters. So those 2 got swapped. And again, that's going to be a bit of a problem, and I'll show you in a little bit. Behind this sign is the actual Jamboree site. And here's a sort of a 180-degree panoramic of that site. And what is pretty evident, and if I can point it out to you, you're going to notice it, there's not a tree. In that 21 square kilometers, there's not one tree. So there is no natural shade on this site whatsoever. I mentioned that we went to 3 head of contingent meetings. So in the last year and 3 months, I'd been in South Korea for almost 5 weeks. The first head of contingent meeting was actually done by conference call, and it was done in February of 2022. The second head of contingent meeting was a full week. It was done in August of 2022. The third head of contingent meeting was done in April of 2023. And then the Jamboree started August 1st to August 12th of 2023. This is our first meeting that we actually got to go on site, and it was hot in 2022. In fact, the shirt I'm wearing that you saw from the original discussion, we actually came to the conclusion that this nice lightweight Columbia fishing shirt was too heavy to be actually used in the weather of South Korea. We wore these and we were sweating profusely a year and a bit ago. When I came back and had a meeting with our actual contingent, I talked to them and said, it is going to be hot. And to get you to understand how hot this Jamboree is going to be, put on your snowsuit, go up into your shower, turn on your shower to the hottest you can get it to go, let it steam up in that room for the next 25 minutes, and then go sit in there for an hour and a half, and you will start to understand just how hot it's going to be in South Korea. When we were there in 2022, it was about 35 degrees with a humidex about 42. So even just walking down the main streets of Seoul, we were sweating. And when it rained, it didn't matter if you put a rain jacket on, because the rain jackets would actually create more perspiration coming from your body than it was actually stopping the rain coming from the outside in. So we learned to just, if it was raining, fine, you just let it rain on you. It cooled you down a bit, and within about an hour, you were dry again. This is us going to the visitor center. You can see that they have spent some money. They spent some pretty considerable amount of money. This visitor center was designed for the sole purpose of, for the Jamboree, of housing the in and outs of the 43,000 people who were going to come in. So it has a massive bus loop around it. It had washrooms, facilities for all those people on the buses. All the organizing committee met here up until the Jamboree. It was well designed, and you know, again, they spent some money to get the place ready for the Jamboree. The picture that I showed you of the site, you would have only seen one building on the site. And that's because they kept on, the government of South Korea kept on flopping of exactly what they want to do with this site. 3 years ago, it was going to be built as a permanent site for camping and recreation. And then 2 years ago, it was decided, as COVID was in the grips of everything, that that was not going to be what it was going to be used for. So they weren't going to build too many major facilities on it. And even at this point, they're not even sure what they're doing with the site after the Jamboree. There's been no decision to be made. The reason that's a bit of a discussion is the actual land for the Jamboree site was developed for rice paddies. So the design for the rice paddies, or this is what the story we've been told, and I said it's all about stories, is that rice paddies want to hold the water for about 12 to 20 hours and then let it dissipate slowly. So without putting huge trenching issues in or trying to create an area that the water would actually sort of wick away fast, it seems to have been designed to actually hold some of the water. Now, all the land of the Jamboree site was reclaimed soil from the estuary of when they created the man-made dam around Sangmunjeong. So they actually created this huge sort of tidal flat area where they actually dammed all of it, and then they took the sludge from that area and created this sort of campsite. So when you actually went down and picked up the sand, you could see little bits of shell in it, and it was a firm sand. And when it dried, it became very much a crystal sand. It wasn't a sand that was dull, it was sharp. It was sort of painful, especially if you're wearing sunscreen, and that sand would get into the sunscreen. So it was like sort of rubbing your arms with sandpaper 24 hours a day, and especially when you were crawling into bed, because that sand was so fine that even during the evening, it just stuck with you. This is Seoul. These are some of the pictures we took of Seoul when we were there. Like I said, it is an absolutely amazing city, metropolis, huge. We went to some fantastic sites on the HOC meetings. This is the Korean National War Monument. They fully understand just how much support that they were given during the 1950s and into the 1960s. You can see that the three top nations there, what the one is the United Nations, there's the United States flag, the Australian flag, and the Canadian flag. And that is based on the number of soldiers who actually gave their life to help the Korean nation of South Korea withstand the invasion of North Korea. So the three nations are very prominently, if for the most part, if you're from Australia, from Canada, from the United States, you're looked upon very well when you're in South Korea. There's an awful lot of pieces of memorabilia. You know, when you see that shot of MASH, if anybody remembers the movie, TV show MASH, they had the sort of the I think it was the little bubble canopied helicopters, lots of pieces from the 1950s war. Temples, every time you turn around, there's a temple. I always joked around that South Korea is very similar to Scotland, is that every time you turn around in Scotland, there's a castle. Every time you turn around in South Korea, there's a temple. And these are massive, massive sites for their temples. This was the head of contingents meeting on the second one where we went and visited in August. You'll take a look and see that they did understand that there was going to be some issues with trying to wick away the water. So what they created is this area here is a massive drainage ditch. This massive drainage ditch had 4-inch white tubes, trying to remove the water to pour it into the draining ditches. The issue became that the sand was so fine that the sand just clogged all of the drainage. So, and then they started, okay, if that's not going to work, then we're going to make big ditches. And they started creating big ditches all around the subcamps. And hopefully that would take some of the water away. This picture was taken in April of this year, so just coming out past their winter. And you can still see a little bit of dampness, but it wasn't too bad. The actual area, the infrastructure, again, solid highways, roadways. These were the sort of tents that were going to be used. These were the tents that the youth were going to be used. Each and every one of the sites would have 2 of these sort of marquee tents for shade. Then each of the units would have 20 of these personal tents, and there would be 2 to a tent. Okay, all of the gear was supplied. This is a typical way of what the subcamp headquarters was going to look like. We were able to take a look at it, and this was in April of this year. What you're not seeing here is a whole lot of infrastructure, because again, for the 43,000 people who are coming to this, unlike the summit, it is not designed as a permanent site. And therefore, when we showed up in April, we expected exactly what we've got to see, because again, nothing was going to be sort of set up on the site until the Jamboree was going to be closer. And this is where people start asking questions of, but you went in August of last year and you went in April of this year, and would you not have noticed that they weren't ready for you, or that they, that there was going to be issues for infrastructure or anything else? And an awful lot of this, we were sort of understanding that we were looking at it, that these things would all be supplied, that we were listening to the organizing committee, that they were providing assurances that everything would be taken care of. WASM was overlooking this as well too. So the World Organizing Scout Organization movement, they were looking over it as well too. So none of the HOCs were overly concerned in regards to what we were seeing. We were commenting on, I would say, Western issues, and I'm trying to be nice along those lines. So what we were concerned about is, to the extent that, dietary needs were going to be needing to be met. So those who were allergic, or those who celiacs, how would that food be taken care of for them? The other part is inclusiveness. So how are the washrooms for transgender, non-binary? How would that be operational? How would those be taken care of? So an awful lot of issues that are very important, especially sort of understanding where the world is nowadays, but also very much a Western sort of view of a Western lens to an event like this. Understanding that there's 43,000 people on this site from 150 different countries across the world, there was that discussion of what we sort of we're trying to accomplish. Every single morning and every single night was the most beautiful sunrise and the most beautiful sunset. This was sort of closing the head of contingents meeting that we had in April. It was just a beautiful sunrise that morning. And one of the key things about that is if you were looking for beauty, you could find it. And we're going to talk about if you were looking for something else. These are some of the gates. This was us showing up in July of this year. We showed up on July the 25th. Our head of contingents started showing up. Our CMT from Canada all showed up. We came in a day early to start preparing for both our participants to show up as well as our ISTs to show up. So this was our first night after we had arrived. From Canada, it was a 13-hour flight, and to get to downtown Seoul was another 2 hours by taxi and vehicle during rush hour. So we were sort of happy. Now, this is the next day because all of the CMT went to the airport to welcome our Canadian participants. We had made a plan for them to be on a 4-day pre-camp, so that they could start bonding together as units and patrols. A standard unit was 40. In that standard unit, there was 4 adults, patrol leaders for each one of the 4 patrols, and then one of them was also named as the unit leader. In most of the units, there were 9 youth to a patrol, 4 patrols to a unit, and Canada has 7 units. And why that's important is because the units are actually then given sites right throughout the whole Jamboree. We'll talk more about that, but for large units such as the UK, which had 100 units, or the United States, which had close to 30 units, that meant that their units were spread right across the whole camp. The Canadians were very compact within the first 10 subcamps of the 20 subcamps that were there. So we brought all our Canadians in, we met up with them, the CMT, gave them a bit of a, yoo-hoo, you're here, way to go, put them on buses and had them start doing the pre-camp. We had booked our pre-camp with the organizing committee, so they had 4 days. They were staying in universities in Seoul. They were going out and doing activities, all pre-planned, all pre-organized. All their meals were taken care of. And it was a great way to get them climatized to the weather, as well as get them to understand a little bit of what was going on in Seoul. to a World Jamboree, once you go to the World Jamboree site, it's like any campground in the world. If you don't get an outside activity, you are stuck on that campsite for 12 days. And one of the things we were concerned about is we were taking Canadians halfway across the world, and we wanted them to explore and see part of South Korea versus just a campground where they could have seen that any single place. So we built it into our program to have a 4 or a 5 day pre-camp so that those youth will actually explore some of the culture, some of the history of the countries that we visit. When the World Jamboree was held in West Virginia, we had a 5 day pre-camp in Washington, D.C. That's where I sort of learned my role, because I was in charge of the pre-camp in Washington, D.C. So I got to take our 700 Canadians and have them learn everything they could about Washington, D.C. We were staying at the University of Maryland and all that. So it was a great opportunity to visit the country. We did the same thing here in South Korea, where we had them in Seoul. And then we moved them down towards closer to the Jamboree site to a city called Jeongju. And it's a beautiful little city, and they got to do some other things, all type of cultural activities. We then went on the Saturday to the Jamboree site, Friday night to the Jamboree site, because we met our ISTs on the Friday. Our participants showed up on Thursday. Our ISTs showed up on Friday, and we went on the buses down to the Jamboree site with them on the Friday. This is Saturday morning. And again, another beautiful sunrise, and you're seeing very few tents set up. This is the IST sections where the ISTs are starting to come in. Now, it had rained 4 days earlier, and water is still pooling in some of the areas over here and over here and over here. Okay. This is what we were still seeing in the subcamps. Now, I want to show you something where I talked about if you were looking for great things, you could find it. If you were looking for bad things, you could find it. This was at the head of contingents meeting in April. Okay, so these were the washroom facilities, and they were showing us what they would look like for the Jamboree. So this is a male, female, this is a male's, and this is just leaders walking into and exploring the washrooms without using the washrooms. You can see how that sand and that dirt just followed you in wherever you went. And you would take a look at these pictures. Those are the shower stalls. That's the washroom stalls. And you would be looking at this going, oh my God, these are filthy. They're dirty. That's just the sand that was on the boots of the headed contingent members as they went and looked into the shower stalls and the washrooms. Why this is important is because some of these washrooms over here, the toilets, were carpeted. Because some of these shower facilities, some of the washroom facilities that they brought in were high-end luxury units that should have been used for a VIP versus 43,000 scouts. Now, what we didn't realize and what we didn't pick up on as HOC members is this little green pail. So we didn't understand what the implications of that little green pail was going to be. This is the first day that we're at the Jamboree. Okay, this is Saturday, and this is all the debris. This is debris from the air mattresses or the mattresses. They just, one of the units just threw all of their stuff here. So this is ISTs. This is one country's ISTs just threw all their cardboard over here without paying a whole lot of attention to it. This area here is the infrastructure people who created a mess by throwing the pipe ends and everything else as they were trying to get stuff organized for the Jamboree. Again, no youth are on the site yet. This is just ISTs. This is ISTs just delivering garbage onto the site. Again, no youth yet on the site. This is Saturday, the first day we're bringing ISTs in. And up here is one of the washrooms, and this is the linoleum. That little waste paper basket I mentioned to you, toilet paper was not to be put down the toilets because it was going to clog the toilets. So the feces covered toilet paper was supposed to go into the little garbage pails next to the toilets. And as you can see, this one over here is starting to overflow. This one was overflowing. This again is only 8,000 people on site, the ISTs, and we're in the IST subcamps. And this is the first day, and they're already starting to look like this. So this is the opening ceremonies. You can see pretty close to a large group, and I'm going to walk you through just sort of what happened. I was just showing you the pictures. This is a picture of the last day we're on site. This is a country's NSO. I'm not going to tell you what country it is. This is a whole country's IST. And when they left every single tent up. They left all their garbage strewn all over the campsite, to the fact that they left their boots, backpacks, uniforms. They didn't take any of that with them. Okay. This isn't a poor country. And it's not the United States. It's a Middle Eastern country. And this is the way they treated the site. So, timeline. As I mentioned, the August 2022 was our first HOC 2. That's the first time we actually got to go to the site. We did realize it was hot. We did realize that the organizing committee, we were telling them things that we had to have sort of completed, finished. We were being told that, yep, everything was going to be done. There wasn't going to be any issues. In August of 2022, the organizing committee goes to WASM and says, look, we'd like to postpone 1 year because we're not really, due to COVID, we think we need to postpone. We actually, in August 2022, when we landed in South Korea, we needed to take a COVID test within 24 hours. And if we failed that COVID test, we were then isolated for 7.5 days, and we would be sent home when everybody else was sent home. The group that we were with, 2 Polish HOC members, did come down with COVID. They were isolated, and so they weren't part of the HOC meeting whatsoever. This is where we're starting to meet up with the United States. We're meeting up with Brad. We're meeting up with Liz. Canada's talking with everybody. We're having a good understanding of what's going to happen. WASM looks at the application to postpone and says, no, we think COVID will be finished and we want to go ahead with this. So fine. WASM said, yes, we're continuing. We continue. April 2023, which HOC 3. And again, we go on site and we are experiencing and expecting exactly what we got. It's not designed to be a permanent camp. All the infrastructure is going to be brought in. We get it. We just want to make sure we have faith in the organizing committee that they're going to do all this work. July of 2023, Wednesday, we show up. The Canadian CMT arrives. Thursday, Canadian participants arrive. They begin their 4-day pre-camp. On Friday, 28th, the Canadian IST arrive. And on Saturday, what I didn't show you is we had a rainstorm at dinner time on Saturday, which brought about 6.5 inches in about a half hour. It completely swamped pretty well the whole site, to the point that they actually had to shut down 3 of the subcamps. So subcamps 19, 18, and 17 were shut down. They started making arrangements to anybody who were in those subcamps, because the kids haven't arrived yet, to make arrangements for anybody in those subcamps to be moved to the subcamps 1 through 16. What that does is put a little bit of pressure on all the other subcamps, and the open spaces that they did have are now going to be utilized for unit space. On Sunday, we actually went out, the Canadian IST and CMT teams went out to the 7 units that we know, because we knew where they were camping. We knew what site they were going to be on, and we explored the site that they were going to be on. And out of our 7 units, we came to the conclusion that 3 of them were in perfect sites. They didn't have any problems. The water had already drained away within 12 hours. They wasn't too muddy. They were going to be fine. We had 2 sites that we thought, okay, and that, you know what, probably are going to be dry by the time our kids show up on Monday. And then we had 2 sites that we knew were going to be problems. And so we talked to the subcamps and moved their sites before the kids even showed up. This is where I keep telling you that the stories are stories, and it's everybody has their own story. The US and the UK, and we're having head of contingents meetings daily from Sunday onwards. In fact, we had an ad hoc meeting on the Sunday where it wasn't scheduled, but all the head of contingents said, yes, we need to have a meeting. So we had a meeting on the Sunday, and we discussed all the issues we're seeing, such as the garbage on site, such as the issues of clinics. We came to the realization that they weren't really ready for the hospitals with the ISTs showing up. Their response back was, we will have all the hospitals and all the clinics ready for the beginning of the Jamboree, which is the 1st. We said, but we have 8,000 people on the site. And they said, well, we have enough for that. And they really didn't. But anyways, a little bit of infrastructure going on. From our point of view, from the Canadians' point of view, we had all 7 of the sites. We knew what we were going to bring into, and we were going to meet our Canadians as they were finishing their pre-camp. They were going to go to the welcoming center. We would get on the bus, take them to their site, make sure they got settled and got organized. And that's what we did on the Monday. On the Sunday, the UK and the United States said that they were going to hold off bringing their youth into the camp on Monday, and they would defer them coming in until Tuesday. These are stories again. We do know that 37,000 people showed up on the Monday to get their kids organized and get them on sites, which left about 7,000, the UK and the United States, who showed up on Tuesday, who got the sites that probably nobody else wanted. Okay, or had issues with the sites, or had issues as they were the last people to come onto the site, and so they would have issues with food. The UK and the United States and the others who were supposed to be in subcamps 19, 18, and 17, they were pushed over into other camps, and the infrastructure for those units did not follow suit. So you had UK units who showed up to their subcamps without tents, which were being supplied, without shade, which was supposed to be supplied. And because they had been moved and their food was supposed to be at another subcamp, it caused all type of grief with the food distribution on the Tuesday for some of these units. So each and every one of the HOCs had different stories and different issues that they had to deal with. And so I'm not blaming anybody, and it's not my position to blame anybody. But from a smaller contingent where we had 375 total people, and the Canadians where we had 2 doctors, we had a trained psychiatrist with us, we had 15 CMT members, we had somebody who was in charge of all the food houses, we had somebody who was in charge of all of the programming, and we had somebody in the camp chief's office. We were being very well fed with all the information on how we could deal with everything that we were doing. So we were lucky and prepared. I'll be blunt and honest. We ran an awful lot of these cycles where we were being prepared for it. So on Monday, August the 1st, mentioned that the UK and the US delay their arrival. There was some site issues. There were some food distribution issues. But when you're creating a city in one day of 43,000 people, you're going to have some of those issues. You're going to have to deal with some of those issues. What was not understood is, from a Western perspective, our Western youth from the Nordic countries of North America to the Nordic Northern Hemisphere of Europe, so UK, Germany, Nordic countries, we just don't understand what 35-degree heat is and 42-degree humidity is day in, day out for 5 to 6 days straight where the temperature drops from, say, 35 during the sunny time Monday afternoon to drops to a really balmy 32 degrees at midnight. Like there was only about a 2 to 3 degree change of temperature in the 24 hours. So you were not getting any break during the nights. The humidity still stayed that hot during the nights as well too. People were going to bed in as flimsy as could be humanly allowed with scouts. So you weren't sleeping in a sleeping bag, you were sleeping on the sleeping bag or on your cot, and your sleeping bag was a pillow or something else. But it was just so hot, so oppressive in regards to the heat. Those Nordic countries and the kids hadn't acclimatized. By the time the third day and the fourth day arrived, I was drinking a liter of water about every half hour to an hour. And I would take a Gatorade. In South Korea, it was called Pocari Sweat. Weirdest name ever, but Pocari Sweat was their Gatorade. We'd intersperse 2 liters of water and then a liter of Pocari Sweat just to get the electric lights. And even at that point, I hate to be blunt, I was still peeing bright orange with all that water going into my system on an hourly basis. It was that oppressive and that hot. We started seeing youth fall down on Monday night, on Tuesday night at the opening ceremonies. That's when we had a huge problem with what we referred to as basically heat stress. These kids hadn't been drinking, they had been excited, they were, working, getting their tents set up and camp set up. And so one of the things that they were not doing was drinking enough water, staying in the shade as much as possible. I still, even to this day, remember seeing the kid in the sweatshirt, okay, walking with a hoodie and a sweatshirt up one of these streets. And I'm just looking at him going, I have no idea how this kid is going to survive. But that's the fashion trend. That's what the kids were wearing. On Tuesday, the UK and the US arrived. The opening ceremonies occur. Remember I showed you the 3 choke points on that island. 1 bridge at the back, 2 bridges at the front, 43,000 people trying to get into that stadium with that road as the only exit out of that stadium. And you have kids falling down because of heat stress. And the ambulances are trying to get those kids to the clinic, which is right next door to the stadium. It was very much of pandemonium in regards to trying to get those youth to the clinics. Now, when I say heat stress, I do not know to the what point any of those youth were at. It's only by hearsay, it's only by comments, but the majority of it was the mild heat stress of, fainting, of not feeling well, that you needed to get liquids into your body. That started to be where you started hearing stories come Tuesday and Wednesday in the national press. And not only CNN started covering it, CTV, CBC out of Canada, NBC, CBS, Reuters, National Telegram, all the major newspapers started picking up on the press and picking up on the issues because it started making its notice in social media. So people were starting to take pictures of those washrooms. People were starting to take pictures of the lack of sun or a lack of shade. So we started seeing those being picked up in social media, and then the national press has started getting attached to it. By Wednesday, August 3rd, and again, there is no heat relief, guys. It is still 35 degrees during the day, which feels like 42, and it feels like a relative humidity of 80 to 90, which meant that when you walked out, it just felt like you were walking into a massive sauna. So weather issues continue on August the 3rd to the point that they stopped doing programming in the afternoon. So all the program events, all the games, all the activities that we had set up for the kids, those started getting canceled. And so now you have 43,000 kids they don't have anything to do, and now they're just coming into the stadium area, the food house areas, all of those areas, because they have no place else to go, and they can't, and they're not going off site. So they're coming in, and that's what they're doing, is they're coming into the key areas, and which is fine because we have all the food houses up and running by the Wednesday. But you know, it's not what the kids are sort of wanting. By Thursday, we started hearing rumblings that, you know, really the press started to make comments of it. But we also started to see what the organizing committee was doing. They were bringing in ice water. They were bringing in skids of bottled water, Procari Sweat. They were handing that out to any kid. They were also putting up shade shelters. They were bringing in air-conditioned coaches and buses and just parking them so that if somebody felt warm, they could go into the air-conditioned coach. They had massive coaches all across the site. When they first created the contract for the washrooms, they had 70 people to clean 350 washrooms. By the time that got finished, by the Friday and the Saturday of that week, they had 700 cleaners cleaning up the washrooms. They were in the process of building new shade centers, new areas for kids to go just hang out. Air conditioning units were being brought in. It wasn't enough to deter the UK, and the UK were the first of the major units to, as of Thursday night, or sorry, as of Friday night, they made the decision and were very much closely talking with the United States, that the UK and the United States both made the decision that they would be leaving the site on Saturday. And that's what happened. The UK 4,500 participants and their ISTs leave on Saturday, August the 6th. The USA participants leave, but the US does something a little differently. Your ISTs, they are independent of your contingent, and so your ISTs were responsible then to make their own decisions whether they were going to stay, whether they were going to go, but they weren't part of the group that went to the Humphreys Army base. The only way they were part of the group that went is if they had a youth in one of the units, and they were the parental parent, then they would make arrangements to that parent to go to the Humphreys Army base. But if it was just an IST, the ISTs were basically left to make their own decisions of what they wanted to do. By Saturday afternoon, almost all of the major problems that we had been talking about had been resolved. They were bringing in the Army to start manning all of the hospitals and clinics. They were bringing in the Army to manage ambulances, medical systems. They were bringing in extra support for water. The air conditioning buses were all being brought in. So by Sunday, those things are getting sorted out. On Sunday night, because of the experience that we have had for the first week, and we've been on site now for just more than 7 days, there was a lack of faith in the organizing committee, I would say, from some of the NSOs on if they could accommodate getting us all off the site. Because by Saturday, we're hearing about the typhoon. And we're hearing that the typhoon now is making a northerly turn, and it is going to hit the Jamboree site sometime Thursday. So some of the NSOs start making their decisions that they will leave, and Australia, New Zealand make the announcement that they will be leaving on Tuesday, and they make that announcement Sunday night. On Monday, August the 8th, the HOC, we were supposed to have a meeting with the organizing committee with all the HOCs. It was supposed to be at 9 a.m. It got moved to noon. And at noon, they made the announcement that they would be having an early departure for the 37,000 participants still on the site. So on Tuesday, August the 9th, over 1,000 buses started rolling into the site and taking units off the site. It's probably one of the biggest infrastructure mass exodus. Very well done, very well organized. Within the 14 hours, they had taken all 37,000 people off that site. and all 37,000 were taken to different hotels, universities. Some even got to go to temples. Some got to go to the Kia National Headquarters Training Center. Everything was opened up to us. All of the information, all of these sites. Canada went to 2 universities about a half hour apart. One of them was a culinary institute, so we had great meals. The other one was an arts college, and they had some really interesting culture. The organizing committee, the government of South Korea, and the governments of all these provinces took care of all of the costs, including the bus costs, the housing costs, the food costs, plus all the programming, and they provided all types of programming, concerts at night, campfires, baseball games, cultural events such as orchestras, 2-hour concerts, pizza making for a day, how to make South Korean porcelain pottery, national war museums and monuments, city tours, visits of temples. All that was done from Wednesday the 10th to Friday, August the 11th. All the NSOs that had committed to stay at the Jamboree were provided all of this free of charge. Those NSOs, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and about 3 others who left early, they were on their own cost. It's our belief at this point, and is that none of this that was taken care of for us was actually taken care of for any of the NSOs that left early. That's a huge investment. We really, the South Korean population, because it started making news in the South Korean press, and the South Koreans very much do not like to lose face, and this was a huge embarrassment to the whole nation of South Korea, and it will continue to be so for a while. But if you were wearing a Scout uniform, you would not believe the generosity of the South Korean people. The kids were getting free meals. The kids were getting free gifts. They were getting coffees and pops. They would go into a store, and the store owner would give the whole patrol, freezies or bottles of water free of charge. It was absolutely amazing the way the older generation would bow and say they were sorry to our scouts as well as to our scouters. It was really a weird scenario for those 4 days from Wednesday to Friday. On Friday, August the 11th, all of the participants were bussed from their accommodations to downtown Seoul to the concert venue, where they were going to have the largest K-pop, and that's, if you're a bit older, K-pop is the sort of genre of music of Korean pop music. They have some of the largest acts in the world right now, with some of the bands. And so they had 19 of the top 21 K-pop artists put on a massive concert for the kids. And they bussed all the 37,000 plus the Americans plus the UK to the site, and put on the closing ceremonies and this massive concert, and then followed it up with a huge fireworks display to sort of finish off the Jamboree. They then bussed all the kids home or back to their universities, their billets, wherever they were going to. And then on Saturday, they bussed them all back to the airport so they could begin catching their flights home. We sent all of our participants, the youth and their leaders, home on the Saturday. On the Sunday, all of our ISTs were bussed back to the airport, and we sent them all home as well too, to Canada for a 13-hour flight. So that was sort of our experience at the Jamboree. Now, to tie it back to what we talk about more than anything else is badges. So this is the participant badge. Okay, and right now on eBay, this is going for anywhere from $95 up to about $160 Canadian. And I'm going to make this as a bold statement to all of you. Caveat emptor. Be careful, folks. What happened was you had 43,000 scouts show up. Each of them have their badges. Each of them have stuff to trade. And by the Saturday, you have 7,000 of the largest trading groups, the UK and the United States, removed from the site. Okay. You have poor infrastructure and poor South Korean organization. And I'm going to show you what that sort of, only one of these badges was given to each participant. You could not buy this badge in the trading shop. You couldn't find it anyplace else. There's only one badge, and there's no difference between this badge for an IST or a participant or a CMT. This is the only design and the only badge that was given out to the people who attended the Jamboree. And this is where I'm saying badges buyer beware. There are lots of program badges, subcamp badges, special events badges were made, but due to the poor organization, very few were ever provided to participants. So there has to be hordes of them someplace in South Korea. So be very careful of if you're trying to trade for them, because there was an opening badge, there was a closing badge, there was a chicken dinner badge. The one on the bottom there is the Tteokbokki Day badge, which is a Korean delicacy. It's sort of a rice noodle and a tomato sauce. They created a badge for that if you were one of the first 250 units to go and get your tteokbokki. Okay, there was a tree planting badge that was only given out to 3 times 150, so 450 participants, because they planted trees to create a forest to commemorate the World Jamboree. Flag bearers were given a badge, so there's only 150 of those flag bearers badges. There was a 1991-2023 anniversary badge only given out supposedly to those who were in the 1991 Jamboree. It is one of the Jamborees where I saw the most private issues. Okay, and so one person would make a badge only for themselves and then masqueraded as being for a contingent or being a group or being, and again, because there was so little organization, very little badge trading that went on, very little anybody trying to figure out how this was going and who actually had authentic badges and who had badges that were non-authentic. Caveat emptor. Very few scout shop badges, and they're in poor quality. I think there's 8 scout shop badges, and they're really badly done. They're almost like I would say tourist badges. They look like they were made for cubs and beavers. They're not very nicely done. They're poor quality, but there's about 8 of them. I'll put together that. I think I bought each and every one of those badges. I'll get a picture of those up. They only had one scout shop necker, and it is green with yellow border, and it just says World Scout Jamboree with a very plain green badge. And once we go to final shots or pictures, I'll show you what that looks like. And here's where NSOs have gone actually crazy. So if you were trying to collect the UK contingent set, there's over 150 unit badges, okay? And that's just the specific unit badges and their ISTs. And each one of their units has made anywhere from 3 to 5 different badges of their units. There's different borders, different, ones you can buy versus ones that you got to trade, the ones that got to put on your uniform. So there is a huge quality of badges out there. Due to early departure, an awful lot of badges never even made it out for trade. So there's an awful lot of youth and adults who are at home doing an awful lot of badge trading right now online, on eBay. I see an awful lot of it being sold on eBay as well too. Here's a couple of other actual true badges. So this is the one here with these 3 gold stars. This was the IST award. Okay, and these gold stars are part of that badge. I do know that for the Canadian contingent, all of our ISTs were given the badge, but they weren't given any of the stars. Okay. This is a package that arrived to one of the leaders yesterday from South Korea. So these are, again, I have no idea, these Jamboree management teams, this is the first I ever saw of these badges. Were they just made up in the last month and a half and sent out? I believe so, because I don't think they ever were at the Jamboree. This was at the Jamboree. These deputy head of departments, I think, were made after the Jamboree. There's an awful lot of product that's being made after the Jamboree. I don't know how we'll ever figure out just what was there, what wasn't there. We do know that there were 4 neckers that were created for the Jamboree. This pink one was leaders and CMT, contingent management team. The blue ones here were the participants, so the youth and the scouters for the units and patrols. The brown one was a special guest, and this is extremely rare. And then the winter one here was the IST's Jamboree planning teams organizing committee. Out of the 3 of them here, or out of the 4, this is the rarest one. There were only 2 events that I'm aware of that this was actually handed out to, and very few, like, I mean, the one event had less than 50 people at it, and the other event maybe had 100 people to it. So this one is the rarest of the 4. Just to show you, like I said, this is just part of what was produced by Canada. So the top line here is the Canada collector set. The one down the right-hand side is another Canada collector set. We created, back up that one. This were our 3 key ones. This is the participant crest. This is the IST crest. And this is the CMT, or International Service Team crest. This was our participant necker. This red and white one was only for CMTs, or the Canadian Management Team, or Contingent Management Team. These are the different divisions. This is Canada House, Admin and Support, Food House, Canada House, Marcom, or Medical, Marcom, and then the really bald guy in here with the 2 teenagers beside him. This is me, and this is Susie, and this is Remy. They both look like teenagers. I still look like the old guy. We made it with the wind design, and that's what it's called. These little notches on it is the Korean wind, and you can see how those little notches intertwine to create all of them together as a unit. Okay, and you can keep adding on to this, but these were all the ones that were created by our one company that created these badges. There's about another 20, maybe 25 other badges that were not created by this company, but these are the majority of the ones that we sort of authorized, shall we say. The US did a beautiful job. I think one of the best times I've seen. These are all your units and your crews. So troops 1 through 18, I think. These were the designs the kids picked. This was your tent badge. The Korean organization had asked every single country to do a tent badge. So the US did this one. We know there's a white border, a red border, a blue border, and then there's a huge, massive backpack done with this. As for the patrols, I think they probably have different badges as well too. So, you know, I'm pretty impressed with quite a few of the badges that were designed by the US on their unit patches. When I was saying that the UK, these are a majority of the tent badges that the countries made. There's a couple of ones that we know did not make them, that huge HOCs, such as the UK. The UK did not make a tent badge, nor did Belgium. But these are the majority of the ones. You'll see Canada's here. And ours goes from the East Coast, Quebec. So the East Coast is the lighthouse. Quebec is the Expo or Olympic Stadium. Toronto is the CN Tower. Manitoba is the green fields, yellow is Saskatchewan, Rocky Mountains for Alberta, and the Northern Territories is our polar ice cap. So all of those are put together in that one badge. And then these are some of the other ones. You'll see the United States down here as well too. And that is the end of my presentation.